Gardevoir EX dominated the North American International Championships and has established itself as the best deck in the format. I'm a pretty big Gardevoir enjoyer myself, but I've enlisted the help of one of the deck's biggest soldiers to help teach my viewers how to master the deck. We break down how to build Gardevoir, how to approach matchups, go through specific board states, and more in this behemoth of a guide. Don't worry if it's overwhelming, I've put timestamps to every single topic in the video. Hopefully by the end of the video, we've taught you how to master Gardevoir EX. Also, as a thank you to Josh for donating his time and expertise with us, I'm paying for one viewer to get a 1-hour coaching session with him. To enter, just comment what you enjoy about these guides, what you would like to see in the future, and your favorite deck. I'll pick a winner a week from today. Hopefully you enjoyed the video, and if you do, please consider leaving a like and subscribing. Thanks. What is going on, Pokemon TCG enjoyers? I'm joined by a very special guest today to go over, I think debatably, probably not even debatably, the best deck in the standard format today, Gardevoir EX. I'm a big enjoyer of Gardevoir, but I brought on someone who's debatably even a bigger enjoyer. I have Mr. Josh Frink here. So Josh, thanks so much for coming to share your knowledge with our viewers. Why don't you introduce yourself real quick to everybody watching?
Yeah, absolutely. Hi, my name is Josh Frink. If you don't know me, I am a Pokemon TCG player from the Chicago area. I am a member of the Shovel Squad, and recently I've been seeing a lot of success playing Gardevoir EX. I had a top 4 at the Orlando Regionals pre-rotation, top 128 in LA, and then a top 64 this past weekend in NOLA, all with Gardy. So yeah, I would say I'm a pretty big enjoyer of the deck. It's definitely my favorite so far.
Nice. Yeah, awesome. Thanks for coming, man. So before we start, I actually have to ask you, what's your favorite Gardevoir EX art? Because I know there's some debate between the illustrations, the full arts, all that. Which ones do you use?
Yeah, I use the shiny ones from, it's Paldean Fates, right?
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, I use those ones. I don't specifically like them more than the illustration rares from SV, but those are the ones that I have, so those are the ones I play.
Nice. Yeah, I have like one normal one, and I have one illustration rare from I think like Paldean Fates or whatever, so I'm like, I need to buy another one. But yeah, let's jump right into it, Josh. So why don't you start off by telling me why you love Gardevoir so much? So tell me why you personally like the deck, and then maybe tell me some things like why the deck is so strong.
Yeah, I think, so for me, a deck like Gardevoir is a lot of fun to play because you have so much fluidity and flexibility in so many different matchups. There's basically never a moment in a game where you're sitting across from your opponent and you go, okay, I can't win anymore, right? There are so many games where you can be down like 2 prizes to 6 and you can still win because there are so many options, right? And I like having decks that allow you to use skill expression to sort of like take wins from positions where other decks would not be able to do that, right? And I think Gardevoir is probably the best deck in the format at doing something like that. Lost Box is up there as well, but for me, that's why I love it so much. I also think that there is the like plethora of fun and interesting attackers. Like, I can't think of another archetype that has had something as diverse as like Drifloon for like your massive beat stick attack. You've got Screamtail for like insane bench snipe. You've got Flutter Mane for the ability lock and also like damage spread. Like, there's so much versatility in the deck that it makes it feel like you can kind of take a win from any position. I think part of what makes Gardevoir really, really strong right now is that there's not a lot of decks that can sort of deal with everything that Gardevoir pushes at you, right? Because you have decks that can kind of deal with all of the small attackers, but a lot of those decks, right, like Lugia, can deal with all the small things. But if you start attacking with Gardy EX and, you know, you knock out an Archeops, it's really hard for them to respond to that. And kind of, you know, vice versa, right? You have something like Ancient Box, or what else? Like Chien-Pao that can one-shot the Gardy EX, but then, you know, maybe struggles with Countercatcher Screamtail or struggles with, you know, Flutter Mane gusting up the Barrel and stalling for a turn. I love how many options you have in any given game.
Yeah, I agree 100%. I think it's like the least linear of all the decks. Like, it's definitely the most flexible, like you said. And I think out of all the decks in Standard, it abuses like disruption the best. Like, you can play the unfair stamp, and like you can just spam Iono because you have your own draw engine, and you're normally behind, so it doesn't really like hurt you as much. So I think that goes kind of hand in hand with what you're saying with it. It's really good comeback potential. So yeah, okay, moving on to, so if I had to tell someone why maybe they wouldn't play Gardevoir, so what would you say are maybe some of the weaknesses of the deck? What's exploitable about the deck right now?
Yeah, so I think Gardevoir's biggest weakness in my mind actually has nothing to do with the deck. It has a lot more to do with the format that we play in. Best of 350 minutes for a lot of the decks in the standard format. It's not enough time to play 3 games unless somebody is playing really fast or like something goes wrong, right? It's difficult to finish 3 games, particularly in the mirror. I think a lot of times if you play the mirror, you know that you're probably playing a best of 2. Lost Box to an extent as well. Although Lost Box tends to be longer at the beginning of the game, and then once you go Flutter Unfair Stamp, it's really just like attack. So yeah, I think that's probably the biggest weakness is like if you lose a game 1, you're kind of accepting the fact that at best you're going to get a tie, right? A lot of times. I think the other weakness with the deck is kind of the same thing as the strength, right? Is because you have so many options, it's really easy to pick the wrong one at any given time. There are so many lines that you can go for that if you commit before refinement or, you go for a slightly suboptimal line, it's a lot easier to get punished because there's a lot that you have to keep track of, right? Those are, I think, maybe the only 2 weaknesses of the deck. I can't think of anything else.
Yeah, I think one thing like that goes with your time point, but it was a strength of the deck is like the deck has such comeback potential. Like one thing I always struggle with is like I don't even like it's hard to know when to scoop with Gardevoir because you're always like, well, if I stick them with an Iono and I buy a turn, like I can win, or if like 2 turns of passing. This might be a hard question to answer, but like, what are some things you look for when you're deciding if you're going to scoop up a game or not, or do you normally just try and play it out and see if you can make one of those comebacks?
I think the actual like answer to that question is more matchup dependent than not. I think actually like if you're analyzing a board in mirror, it's a lot easier to determine when to scoop because like at the end of the game, like if your opponent takes like an extra prize with Monkey or like is able to do like if you put 40 on your Screamtail and kill a Cresselia, what they can do is move 30 to the Screamtail, counter catcher, and then Flutter, right? And if they take like those swings, it's going to be a lot harder for you to come back. And so I think in those positions, right, it's a lot easier to be like, okay, if I'm 2 prizes behind at the end game, I'm probably not winning. But against something like Lost Box, you can kind of win from any spot. And something like Future Hands, like those decks that really want to get ahead fast and early, specifically like Iron Hands decks, right? It's a lot harder to scoop because you know that if you just go like hit with Gardy, Monkey, Iono, a lot of times you're going to be able to then go Monkey move 30, take another 2 prizes, and then you just need them to miss for 1 turn. So I have tended more towards trying to play faster versus scooping games. That being said, like against some matchups, right, like Control, like Snorlax, when you lose.
Yeah.
just concede. Like I think that's general advice for everyone on every deck. Like there is a point against those decks where when you've lost and you just need to concede. But yeah, I think you're right. It is hard to know when to scoop because a lot of times the answer is that you can still win. And it's hard to know what the percentage like odds are, right? Because it basically just comes down to like, okay, does my unfair stamp stick?
Yeah, exactly. I think another piece of advice I always give a lot of people is you have to be kind of aware of in general how long it takes for you to play a game. So like, let's say you're like 35 minutes into a round, it's game 2. Like you probably don't have enough time if you scoop to play out a game 3. So like that might be a scenario where like your win percent might be like 30%, but it's like it's probably like a better chance than like trying to play the last game. You could even brick the last game. Another thing I say is like if you're playing against a favorable matchup, and like let's say you have like 25 minutes left, like that's something sometimes where I would consider scoop. Like let's say you're playing against Raging Bolt and you just got a really bad start. I'm like that's a matchup where I'm like, why don't you scoop that up and see like actually finish because you're favored. It's a tricky thing, but those are just some like general things I usually look at when I'm deciding if I'm going to scoop or not. So. Yeah,
and that's actually like an interesting point as well with the Raging Bolt specifically is like you have to kind of measure your odds of like your comeback potential versus the odds of you, because if you go 3 prizes behind against Raging Bolt, you do lose, right?
Yeah.
And so you're turning a potential tie into a potential loss by conceding. And so if you have maybe 20% to win game 2, you know, you have to measure that against like, what are the odds that I just don't set up, which is a problem sometimes with Gardevoir.
Yeah, 100%. But I mean, like, my philosophy generally is when I go to tournaments, like, if you want to have deep runs, like, you need to win. Like, you need to have things go your way.
Sure.
Like, you can't really play scared. Like, so even if there's, like, maybe a 30% chance you brick, like, I'd rather just take that 70%, be like, all right, let's hope I set up and win. Maybe if you're, like, trying to make day 2, like, you're close to making top cut, you can afford a tie. Maybe you can change your risk tolerance. But in general, to me, like, I think in Pokemon, it's a game where you want to play to win instead of play not to lose a lot of the time. That's my philosophy, so...
Yeah, I like that. I like that as a philosophy for sure. Obviously, everything is like dependent on circumstance, but I think that's very fair. Especially like if you're looking to make a deep run, you hit a Raging Bolt, like you should be going into that assuming, okay, like I can win, right?
Exactly. So yeah, I mean, like everyone has different risk tolerance, and like I hate in Pokemon all the time. The answer is it depends, but that's just general guiding philosophy for me. So cool. Yeah. So that's a quick, good overview, I think, on the deck. So I kind of want to spend a lot of time here on the deck building, because I think we've seen, especially with the list that came from NAIC, like there's so many different ways you can play this deck. There's so many Pokemon. There's so many items, techs, even supporters you can play. So Josh, I kind of want to start on the A spec, since I think this kind of really alters how the deck plays. So I think there's 2 really popular ones. There's the Unfair Stamp and there's the Hyper Aroma. There's also kind of an argument for the Cape, but that's kind of fallen off the Hero's Cape. So I want you to start maybe with the Unfair Stamp, since I know this is your A-Spec of choice. So can you kind of run through like what makes this A-Spec so strong, and like maybe what are some weaknesses of playing this A-Spec?
Yeah, so Unfair Stamp is one of, if not the most broken card in the new set. The ability to play Roxanne as an item when your opponent takes their first prize, I don't think I need to explain why that's really good, right? Like, it's an item, you're drawing 1 less card than Roxanne, and you're disrupting, right? One thing that I think helps people understand why Unfair Stamp is so good is that you can kind of compare it to Counter Catcher in the deck, where like Counter Catcher became very strong because it allowed you to do something like Boss and Iono on the same turn, right? Unfair Stamp is the same thing, right? Now you can Boss, Iono, and Turo all on the same turn, which is just ridiculous. And it also is consistency for you, right? If you get knocked out early and like, you know, maybe your hand isn't that great, right? You can Arven, get your tool if you need it, and then Unfair Stamp them, and it can kind of set them back. So it can be a bailout in the early game. It's also incredibly strong in the late game, right? Those situations we were talking about earlier, where part of Gardy's huge comeback potential is you stick a big Gardevoir in the active, you Unfair Stamp them, and you smack. And if they don't have an immediate response, it's really, really difficult for them to come back from a point like that, especially now with Munkidori. Unfair Stamp just lets you do so many ridiculous things. It lets you see so many more cards. I think, you know, if you could play 5 Ionos, you would probably play 5. But now you don't have to, because you could just play Unfair Stamp and it's just as good. And the fact that it's Arven searchable as well, I think it's crazy. And unless you're against, you know, block or, I mean, even control. I played against Alessandro twice and I used Unfair Stamp in both of those games. Like, Unfair Stamp will be valuable every single game you play, where I don't think that that's true necessarily for Hyper Aroma. Yeah. So those are the upsides to Unfair Stamp. I don't think there are downsides. I guess the downside is that you're not playing Hyper Aroma.
Yeah, it's
right?
the opportunity cost, basically, I guess.
Right.
Yeah. I think one thing I think that you basically like hit on this is like we've talked about how Gardevoir is so good as a disruption deck. I normally find when I play Gardevoir, like if you get one turn where you stop your opponent from doing what they're trying to do, like one turn where they don't attack, one turn where they don't take a knockout, you kind of win or you take control of the prize trade. So like you can Unfair Stamp like early in the game. If they draw out of it, like you can start spamming Ionos. Like odds are just saying like you'll probably stick one. I think another thing that Unfair Stamp's really good at is, like you said, like you can do it early. Like you could do it as soon as turn 2 in theory. And Disruption's much stronger at the start of the game versus the end of the game, even though that seems kind of counterintuitive. at the start of a game, like people have had less time to thin their deck. They've had less time to set up. They've had less time to set up a support Pokemon like Bibarel, for example. So I find Unfair Stamp is actually the strongest like early in the game, and it kind of loses a little bit of power as the game goes on, but it's still obviously super strong. I guess weakness would be like it's less consistent, for example, than Hyper Aroma when you go first or just setting up. But like you said, like I think the power level of the card is just really, really high. It's my preferred spec in the deck as well. But okay, let's talk about the Hyper Aroma then. So actually the finalist, and I think a couple of other lists in top 8 also played the Hyper Aroma instead. So how does that kind of change how the deck functions, and like why would you play Hyper Aroma in Gardevoir?
Yeah, so the predominant reason that I understand for playing Hyper Aroma, right? Because my argument for not playing Aroma has always been like, if I'm committing my deck slot to an A spec, I want it to be good every game. And like in theory, you can be like, yeah, Hyper Aroma is good every game because, it's never a terrible card, right? You can always at the very least just like use it as a way to get one Cresselia. But a lot of Gardevoir players and a lot of good Gardevoir players that I've talked to have all come to the same conclusion that if you play the game, you're usually going to win, right? There is no explicitly like horrendous matchup anymore. Like the worst one is like maybe Miraidon, maybe Ancient Box, I guess. But again, if you set up against those decks, a lot of times you're going to be able to win. And Hyper Aroma versus Unfair Stamp, it is a very, very strong consistency card, right? Because if you go first, if you get those rolls established and then you get the Hyper Aroma, it's insane, right? You can start turboing energy into the discard pile as quickly as turn 2. Not that you can't necessarily do that in the Unfair Stamp version, but it's less easy to do, right? Because you can just Arven for triple Cresselia. And so most people that are playing the Hyper Aroma, it's because they know it's going to make them play more games. And if you play more games, on average, a better player playing a better deck is going to win more often. And so that's the logic to me for Aroma. I personally think that if you're going to play Aroma, you have to play like specific other tech cards for the matchups where you need the stamp, right? Like Lost Box. If you Flutter Mane Unfair Stamp them, that's your win condition in a lot of these Lost Box matchups, right? And so if you're not playing the Unfair Stamp, then you need to do things like Stefan did where you're playing the Klefki, playing the second Flutter Mane, right? And so I think Hyper Aroma necessitates more specific inclusions, but it does make your deck more consistent.
Yeah, I think I agree with pretty much everything you said. I think the biggest thing with Aroma is it makes going first a lot better. It ups that consistency a lot. You still have to like draw Poffins and Ralts and stuff. Right. And the other thing you can do is you can maybe you can either completely cut the evolution TMs or maybe cut down to 1. So you can kind of like scam a deck space like that way as well. Which I think when building this deck, we have a lot of cards I want to discuss after. It's like this deck is very tight on deck space.
Yes.
So that to me is like maybe another plus for the Hyper Aroma. But like you said, like it lets you play the game more at the trade-off of like Stamp is just such a powerful card that can let you like win games on the spot sometimes. So that's kind of what you have to balance. We can quickly share here at the end, or talk about at the end here, the Hero's Cape, because this used to be the ace spec in Gardevoir, and I think we've kind of seen it completely fall off. So can you kind of maybe explain like why Hero's Cape has kind of fallen out of favor now?
Yeah, so I think the big reason that Hero's Cape has fallen out of favor is not because it's significantly worse, but mostly just because you got 2 ace specs that are better for the deck. I think that's the main thing. Jamming Tower, though, does make it a lot worse. The biggest reason right this moment that you would want to play Hero's Cape is to attach it to Gardevoir. That didn't used to be true, right? You used to need Hero's Cape so that you could hit numbers against Charizard. You used to need it in like the ability to hit those like high numbers, right? That was the reason that you played it. And then some matchups, right? Like Lugia, you would attach it to Gardy. Turbo Hands, you would attach it to Gardy. Because of Munkidori, you don't need that anymore, right? Bravery Charm lets Drifloon hit the 330 number with the Munkidori. And so the Hero's Cape loses a lot of value in that aspect. And in the predominant matchup where you would want to put Hero's Cape on Gardy, that Lugia, a lot of them are playing Jamming Tower. So the value is not there. I do still think Hero's Cape is decent. It's probably not my third A-Spec choice. My third A-Spec choice is actually probably Scoop Up Cyclone.
Okay.
But I think like there's value to it. I think if you desperately want a cape, though, probably just play a Lux Cape.
Yeah, I think that makes sense to me. Because I think if you put a Hero's Cape, like you're saying, on a Gardevoir or whatever, and it like gets knocked out, you're going to lose anyways. So like Lux Cape kind of just does the same thing.
Right.
So, cool. Yeah, I think that was good discussion on the A-Specs. Yeah, let us know in the comments which A-Spec you like playing with Gardevoir. 'Cause I'm actually curious, because it seems people are kind of split. Cool. Okay, next I want to move on to, I just call this segment like the core cards, where like you think like this needs to be in like every Gardevoir list. So I kind of want to start with the Pokemon, because I think there's a lot of different Pokemon that's like can kind of cycle in. So like, why don't you start with some of the core Pokemon? So like I'll give you one to start. So Flutter Mane, like do you think this is core to the deck no matter what?
Yes, I would never play Gardevoir without Flutter Mane. I actually genuinely believe Flutter Mane is the most broken card in the deck. It just has so much utility in every single matchup, right? If you think about literally any matchup, you can think of a utility for Flutter Mane if you spend enough time, right? You can stall the barrels. You can, against like Charizard, if they only have one Mander in the active, Flutter Mane in the active means they have to move it to the bench before they can evolve. There is so many places. And then obviously like Lost Box, where you literally shut their deck down, right? I think Flutter Mane just like gut checks so many decks, especially with Disruption, where you have an answer to this, but do you have an answer to this when I can use it 3 times with Rod and Iono you and Stamp you? Like it's so strong. I think Flutter Mane is the most broken card. I think it's incredibly underutilized in so many matchups, particularly Mirror. It's like your best attacker in the Mirror. Yeah, Flutter Mane 100% is a necessary card.
Sweet. That's what I expected you to say, but I'm glad you kind of said that. And when we get to the mirror section of the matchups, I kind of want to like go over some of the stuff, like how you can use it against the Gardy, how you can use it against Curly, stuff like that. So I think it'll be awesome.
Yeah.
The next card, I used to think this was staple, but we actually saw a list in top 8 that didn't play this, is the Drifloon. So like, do you think the Drifloon is core, or can you get away without playing that card?
I actually think about Henry's deck as like a sub-archetype of Gardy. I think if you are playing standard Gardevoir, it is a staple. Henry was playing something that I would not consider the same as the other decks. He did not play Bravery Charms. He was essentially playing like a control style of Gardy, utilizing the Munkidoris and the Flutter Manes to spread damage around, right? And then using something like the Devolution TM to sort of take those knockouts, as opposed to trying to use the Drifloon to like smack things, right? Because he has the double monkey, he has the multiple flutter, and then the Devos, you can kind of exchange it in those matchups, especially with the enhanced hammer, so they can't even really miss to protect themselves from those plays. If you are playing this iteration of the deck, you don't need Drifloon. It's just not necessary. I do think this version of the deck is weaker into certain metas. Henry made an insane meta call. In my opinion, like predicting that top players would be on Gardy Lost Box and building a list that beats those things is really smart. But this list is going to be weaker into something like Lugia. It's going to be weaker into something like Raging Bolt, where that sort of like spread damage strategy is not as effective.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. He does play the luxurious cape, like a Screamtail can like be a pseudo Drifloon to blow up threats, but like you're saying,
Sure.
it's like it's not as consistent at beating those aggro decks. But like this is actually
Right.
a really cool build. I agree. If you're expecting more mirror,
Yeah, it's super cool.
So I'm not surprised Henry did so well.
Yeah.
At NAIC. I actually lost him at NAIC. I had a couple
Same.
draw past
Me too.
So no, that's awesome. Cool. Okay. Other core cards. Let's think. So Screamtail, is that a core card to the deck? Could you ever get away with not playing that? Yeah.
I would never not play Screamtail. Countercatcher Screamtail is like a top 5 reason to play the deck. Like it's really, really good.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's obvious why that card's good. Just Snipe in Pokemon's good. A lot of decks don't play Manaphy, and Screamtail actually does quite a bit of damage for a Snipe Pokemon, which I think is good as well. How about Cresselia? So I think Cresselia saw a lot of play in people's lists because everyone assumed Dragapult was going to see play. It's also good against Lost Zone and kind of a mirror. So do you think Cress needs to be in the deck, or if the meta, I don't know, calls for it, could you ever take that card out?
I think you can take it out. When I was doing my masterclass, I had like my list at the time had Cress and Mimikyu, and those were sort of like the two flex spots that I was like, if you don't think you're going to hit this much, like, for Cresselia, it's Mirror and Dragapult are the matchups where it's the most relevant. If you don't think you're going to hit a ton of that, you can cut the Cresselia. I think based on how NAIC went, I would not cut Cresselia. But if we, if in a theoretical world where we're playing this format a ton, I mean, locals are going to come back. And if you don't expect a lot of Mirror, you don't expect a lot of Dragapult, I think you can cut the Cresselia.
Yeah, so I say it's probably not core, but for now, it's probably like keep that in your deck.
Yes, sure. Based on Gardy Apocalypse, I would say, because in my mind, Cresselia is the most useful in Mirror. That's actually like its most significant application. It is very good into Dragapult, and it has like use sometimes against Lost Box. Yeah, sometimes. You saw it in like Stefan's match where like if you get a Bravery Charm on it, you can stick it active, and it's a little tougher for them to deal with. But yeah, if you don't expect to see those matchups, if your local is filled with Lugia players, go ahead and cut it. But like Ciaran said, for now, probably worth keeping in.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, so another card that we saw actually one player on topic cut is Manaphy. Could you get away, and by extension, I guess, Radiant Greninja, because you don't play as many Nest Balls, ways to search them. Could you get away with, I'll start with Manaphy. Can you get away with not playing Manaphy?
I mean, clearly you can get away with it because somebody did, right? I wouldn't. I would not cut Manaphy. I think it's too risky against Lost Box specifically. I think it's too risky to not have the Manaphy, because if they just go for the Ninja, like even Chien-Pao, I think Chien-Pao, again, in a theoretical world where we're playing more tournaments with this format, I think Chien-Pao goes up quite a lot in play rate based on its NAIC performance. And some of them are not playing Cologne, but even if they are, you need to force them to have it. And then even some Lugias are playing like the Water Ogre Pawn, and like, I don't know. I would not cut Manaphy, but I guess you can. But yeah, I would say I would not.
Yeah, I mean, you can also search it with the Poffin, so I think it's a lot easier to get.
Right.
But let's talk about the other water Pokemon then. Can you get away with cutting the Greninja?
Yes, you can. I think you can cut Greninja for any other support bailout Pokemon, right? So you can cut Greninja for Tatsugiri. I know Henry played Greninja and Squawkabily, but I think in theory you could cut Greninja for the Squawkabily. One thing that I've noticed a lot in coaching and with like players that I've just talked to and like seen play Gardy is there's like a bigger desire to bench Ninja than there needs to be. Ninja takes up valuable bench spots, and so most often you're using Greninja when you are going first, and your hand is like Nest Ball and a bunch of dead cards, and one of them is energy. Because now, Mirage Step is obviously very strong, but now, because of Arven Evo, you don't actually need to have a Ralt established turn one. So what you can do instead is on that turn one, Nest Ball for Ninja, draw yourself some cards, because then next turn you can Arven, Poffin, Evo, right? It doesn't change anything. So in my mind, Greninja is more of a bailout card than it is like true mid-late game consistency, although it can fill those slots should you need it to. That has been the most like reason for me to play it, and so you can replace it, I think, with something like a Tatsugiri that does something similar. Squawkabily, I have not played any games with Squawkabily, but like, Nest Ball for Squawk, discard your hand full of energy seems probably fine as well.
Yeah, I think like you said, it's better in the early game. Another thing too is like as the game goes on, like sometimes like your Curlies get knocked out, you evolve to Gardevoir, then you lose your refinement, so it kind of just replaces it. But the later you go in the game, the more of your energies are in the discard, so it kind of loses some strength. So yeah, I agree. I think you can get away with not playing the card, but like you said, like you probably want to put another consistency Pokemon in its place. We can talk about those. So you actually mentioned Tatsugiri. Let's flip here and some cards to consider. So I have a long list here. We don't want to spend a lot of time on each of them because some of them I put are kind of niche. So what do you think about Tatsugiri in this deck? It's not a psychic type, so you can't embrace to it, but it can get you supporters like in between knockouts or something.
Yeah, I think Tatsugiri is a really interesting card. I think it is good, right? The downside to Tatsugiri is that you have to commit an energy to it every single time that you put it in the active, which means that on that turn, you cannot attach a dark energy to your Munkidori. Unless you're, I guess you could like Turo the Tatsugiri, but then like you use Tatsugiri to get a supporter. So if you're using Turo to pick it back up, like you may as well just not have, right? But I think Tatsugiri is really cool on the turns where it's good, right? Early game especially, like if you need to get that Arven to set up, like we talked about earlier, right? You win most of the games you set up, and Tatsugiri is going to be better than Greninja at finding you Arven specifically. And so I think it's really cool. I haven't played a ton of games with it. It was one of those things where like the Japan Champions list came out and I was like, I don't have time. I don't have time to test this. But I do. I like the Tatsugiri. I think play some games with it. Something that's interesting to me is that we've really only seen Tatsugiri in double monkey lists, which feels counterintuitive because it's already difficult to have energy attachments for Tatsugiri and one monkey. And then you need like the second one as well. So I'm interested in Tatsugiri and like single monkey lists more than I am in how it's been played traditionally. But yeah, I can definitely see the value of it. I think Tatsugiri is a really cool card.
Yeah, that makes sense. One slight problem I have with it is if you go second, like if I'm gonna like let's say Poffin forward or whatever, like if I have to attach retreat, like I can't Arven for Evo anymore. So that's correct. One reservation I have about it. So you kind of have to start it naturally, which is like your odds that's 1 in 8 games. Right. But yeah, I guess like maybe in the middle of the game or like maybe in like turn 2 or like on a late game, if you really need Turo or Iono, that I can see it being really good. But like you said before, bench spaces are a premium as well, so it's kind of hard to fit in. So I think it's a cool card. I don't quite think it synergizes like enough for me to want to put it in my deck right now.
I will say, I think if you're playing Tatsugiri, you should be choosing first more often.
Yes, that makes sense. Yeah. So maybe an Aroma build actually might be better for a Tatsugiri, I think, in my opinion, because you don't really need the Evo. So cool. Okay, next card. We've kind of spoken about it a little bit, but like, what about the Klefki? So Stefan played the Klefki, and we saw in the finals like how effective that is in that one specific match against Lost Box. I know it has utility against other stuff like Raging Bolt, Miraidon. So where do you stand on the Klefki? Yeah,
I think Klefki is a really interesting card. Obviously, my top 4 list I played the Klefki. It is very good against Lost Box in the early game. I think the issue with Klefki, and you kind of see it in Stefan's match against Andrew, is that late in the game, once they have these energies on the Greninja, it becomes a liability. And so Klefki forces you to play this like weird balancing act of when am I supposed to take my Klefki out of play? And sometimes you get it wrong and then you get hard punished by Iron Bundle, right? Because eventually you need to switch to attacking with Flutter Mane. You can't just attack with Klefki forever. And so it creates really uncomfortable board positions for you in the late game. That being said, it's a very strong card. It can literally just oppress your opponent out of the game, right? Like you saw it. Game 2 of the finals, Stefan completely oppressed Andrew out of that game. There was really nothing he could do. So I do think it's valuable. Again, based on how the meta sort of shaped up at NAIC, based on like the results of NAIC, Miraidon seems like a solid play because it's decent into both of the decks that did well. And Klefki is really good into that matchup, being able to, because they want to choose second. And so you can just choose first, Poffin for Klefki, put it in the active, and watch them cry. Because they're not, I mean, maybe they boss around it, maybe they do, but I'm going to tell you this right now. If this happens to you at a League Cup, you can message me and be mad. There's no way they're getting boss's orders and turn 1 amp. It's just not going to happen. So the Klefki buys you turns to play that matchup. And again, I think if you are able to set up versus Miraidon, the matchup is actually just fine.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, I think, again, some of what we said with the Tatsugiri, like I think the reason it works so well in Stefan's list specifically is when you play the Aroma, it's like you can afford on your first turn to retreat to it. The Evo build, It has a little bit more trouble because the Evo build, like you want to go second to use that. So again, like you kind of want to commit your attachment plus an Evo turn 1. But like you said though, like it enables you like against a lot of matchups where like they want to go second. So if you win game 1, you lose the flip, they'll go second. Like it gives you that extra option to just like Klefki, even against Raging Bolt, you shut off like Ogerpon, you shut off Squawk, you shut off Greninja, like you shut off a lot of cards.
Even Bundle, you shut off the Bundle as well, which is really interesting in that matchup.
Yeah, exactly. So I think the Klefki is actually quite strong. I think we might see a lot more lists start playing that going forward. Cool. All right, another Pokemon here. What do you think about Mimikyu?
I love Mimikyu. Mimikyu is like one of my favorite cards in the deck. Obviously, I played Gardy in like the Charizard dominant format, and Mimikyu was by far and away the most important card in that matchup. Charizard plays Canceling Cologne now, and honestly, you don't need Mimikyu to beat the matchup anymore. Munkidori does a lot to sort of shore up certain aspects of the matchup. So I don't think it's worth it. It is good against Bolt. It is good against Miraidon. It's good against like Future Hands, but that deck doesn't exist. Because, right, like the ability to put damage counters on something, right? It gets around Heavy Baton, it gets around Gift Energy, those kinds of things. And Mimikyu is valuable in that respect. But especially if you're already playing Cresselia, you can use that instead of the Mimikyu in the Future Hands matchup. The Miraidon matchup as well, you can just use the Cresselia instead of the Mimikyu. And so I would, if you're worried about that matchup, rather see you playing Klefki than Mimikyu. And again, like it's probably got niche use into Charizard. Like if you go for the Mimikyu play the way that you would in the last format, you force them. Force is a strong word. A lot of them are going to go Cologne KO Mimikyu instead of killing a Kirlia. And because now you only need the 5 energy in the discard pile to kill a Charizard, it's a lot easier if you get an extra turn of Kirlia to like get to those numbers. I'm sure there's like some amount of value there. I don't know. I tried. I hung on to it for a really long time. In my master class, I was like, yeah, there's still a Mimikyu in my list. And then the night before I cut it. Nice. So I would probably not play it.
Yeah, I think you basically hit the nail on the head. Like Klefki's just better in the matchups where you want to put Mimikyu besides Charizard, which is like a low percent of the meta.
Right.
Cool. I think those were a lot of the heavy hitter Pokemon. A couple ones I have left to ask you. Is there ever an argument to play the memory skip Ralts, or is it just 60 too much? Nope. Okay, I agree. No. Let's move on. Okay, some support Pokemon. Like you kind of mentioned you haven't played a lot with Squawk. And I also have Lumineon here as another support Pokemon. So like what are your opinion on playing those support Pokemon in the deck?
Yeah, I like the Squawk. I think the Squawk is really cool in theory. I think Henry's list specifically is like one of the coolest lists that came out of... It's funny, the 2 coolest lists for me that came out of NAIC are both made by players named Henry. I think the Squawkabily offers a lot of really interesting utility, not just in like the Squawkencies, but also against certain matchups where you want to stick something that, maybe wouldn't be one shot by a Cramorant or something. You can literally in the Lost Box matchup put Squawk in the active, motivate, accelerate 2 energy to Flutter Mane. And then you don't have to put any damage counters on the Flutter Mane. This is really niche. I don't know why I'm starting my talk about Squawkabily by talking about a very specific niche use case, but I do think the Squawk is really cool. And again, I think something that I'm going to keep coming back to throughout the rest of this video and when I coach and all of these things, right, is Gardevoir wins most of the games where you play the game. And Squawkabily is a great card for letting you play the game.
Yeah, I think it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. But again, it's a 2 prize liability. That's the other aspect, right? Is like Gardevoir is a pseudo 1 prize deck, right? Because you have all of your attackers for the most part are going to be 1 prizers except Gardy EX. And, you can still, it's not as prominent anymore as when it, pre-rotation, but you can still like use Turo to pick up the Gardy and present a 1 prize board. And if you're using the Squawkabily early game, it's not as easy, right? You can Turo it later in the game. But then if you're Turoing that, you're not Turoing the Gardevoir. So it can create awkward positions where your opponent, especially something like Raging Bolt, can take advantage of the fact that you have an easy 2 prize target.
Yeah, I think I have Henry's list open too. He also played Mew EX in the list.
I know, yeah.
So can you kind of explain, what do you think the thought process is behind the Mew? Like, does that make sense to play in the deck?
I like Mew. I've always liked Mew and Gardy. I'm not sure specifically what matchup they were using it for. I would imagine it's pretty good in Mirror. I would imagine it's pretty good in Lost Box because you can steal that Radiant Greninja attack. And especially, I think, right, NAIC is a closed deck list format. And so if they don't see it coming, you can steal games really, really easily using that Mew. It's also like, not that Gardevoir needs a lot of disruption proofing, but in theory, it's like semi-disruption proofing in the deck. I'm trying to think of what are some attacks that you would want to copy right now? Oh, it's really interesting into Raging Bolt. It's really interesting into Raging Bolt. Yeah, that's interesting. So yeah, I like the Mew. I think that's cool. I don't know that I would play it in a standard list, but I think a lot of Henry's deck, right? The triple vessel, like so many double candy, triple vessel. Oh, yeah. Like so much of this list is meant to be surprise factor, like come out of nowhere, do crazy stuff. And I think the Mew is like a really cool aspect of that.
Yeah, I think so too. Like he only plays 2 Arven, like you see research in the deck.
Yeah.
So it's definitely a more turbo-y way to play the deck. Because like maybe turn 2 you're attacking if you get that rare candy Gardevoir. So yeah, I think it's neat because like I guess normally with Gardevoir you normally go behind because you're taking those turns to set up. So if you can start attacking earlier, like I guess it doesn't matter as much. You have a liability in play, and he plays double turbo, so he could get rid of it against later. But yeah, it's a really cool way to play the deck.
And again, no Drifloon, no Bravery Charms. Yeah. So it's very interesting. But I think this is less weak to something like Raging Bolt and something like Lugia because you have like alternative options to deal with those things, right? So that's cool. I like that a lot.
Yeah, I agree. Cool. Okay, I think that's all I had for the Pokemon here. So next I wanted to go over some trainers here. So what are your thoughts on Palpad? So I think a lot of people view Palpad as a way to kind of cheat on like some of their supporters, like play lower counts, like a Palpad, instead of playing, for example, 4th Iono, double Turo. So where do you stand on Palpad in the deck?
Yeah, so I think Palpad historically has operated that way, where like you can cheat the extra supporter. I think a lot of people were playing Palpad because they were worried about Dragapult, and they were like, okay, well, I want to be able to reuse my Turos. It's nice because you can reuse Boss in theory, like those kinds of things. But again, we're once again coming back to you win most of the games you set up, and if you have Palpad in your opening hand, every single game you are going to wish that it is an Iono. Every game. And so the value of Palpad, I think, can be replaced with just like playing better around your resources, right? Use your boss when you have to use your boss. Don't, willy-nilly get rid of your Ionos with refinements and things like that. And then you don't need the Palpad. And I think the Dragapult matchup, people were over-exaggerating how many Turos you need. Everyone was like, yeah, you need double Turo Palpad. You can never lose. But honestly, I don't think you should lose with two Turos. Yeah. I think that's enough.
I agree. So like you said, you have to find, if you play Palpad and you have like 1 Turo, for example, you have to find the first Turo first, use it at the appropriate time. Palpad, find the other Turo again. Like it's just like you're going on a goose hunt. So I agree. I think it makes more sense to play double. Cool. Another supporter, I think we used to see this played a lot more in Gardevoir, is the Airy. So I don't think anyone played Airy. So why do you think Airy kind of fell out of favor here?
I think it's because the matchups that Airy was good in are gone. Yeah, like that's really it. Like, yeah, Chien-Pao and Charizard were the 2 matchups where like, it's still good into Lost Box. It still is like pretty solid into Lost Box, but I don't think you need it into Lost Box. But yeah, the predominant matchups where you were playing Airy were for Charizard, Chien-Pao, Tina, and where are they?
Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense. This is kind of as the meta evolves, techs kind of come in and out. Right. Cool. The next, I guess I'll put these 2 into one. So like, where do you stand on the stadiums? Like the Artisan, Sinnoh, do you play both? Do you play one? What do you think?
My list played 1-1. I like the consistency of double Artisan Hammer. I don't dislike that at all. The reason I played 1-1 is because I liked the double stadium bump because I expected heavy jamming tower Lugias. I didn't hit any Lugias at the tournament, but in theory, I thought it was good. And I think the Temple has really solid use against things like Dragapult Pidgeot and, I don't know, what else plays special energy? Those were like I think
that's the main one. The main
Miraidon, I guess. You can shut off the double turbo.
Yeah.
But basically in my mind, you needed double stadium. And so that was either Artisan and Temple and then don't play Hammer and use that spot for something else, or it was double Artisan Hammer and then you have to find a spot somewhere else. And I think a lot of lists were cutting, the 10th energy for that extra spot, which I don't hate. I do hate cutting second Dark, but I don't hate the 7-2 splits.
Yeah. Okay, actually, sticking on Stadium, so we used to always see Collapse in Gardevoir. Now the Collapse is completely gone. So why did Collapse kind of fall out of favor in terms of the deck and to play these other stadiums?
Yeah, so Collapse before, again, I think it's a matchup thing. There were 2 reasons why you played Collapse in the deck. The first reason was so that you could more easily remove your Gardevoir EX from play, right? You could remove that damage or the 2 prize liability against something like Snorlax as well. You could get rid of the extra energy, which is just not super necessary anymore because there's not very many things that can easily one-shot Gardevoir. The other thing is and probably the biggest reason to play Collapsed last format was so that you could remove your Klefki from play against Lost Box and against Chien-Pao, so that they could not go gust up the Klefki and then shut off your Manaphy and kill 2 things. And so you needed that extra way to do that. And you needed a stadium bump as well for the Chien-Paos for, whatever deck you wanted the stadium bump for. And so those were the predominant reasons to play Collapsed. And now a lot of lists don't play Klefki, and a lot of decks can't really punish the fact that there's a Gardevoir on your bench, or if they can, a lot of times it's matchups where Turo is just as good. And so there's not really a great reason, I think, to play Collapsed. It's still not bad. And honestly, in a list like Henry's, I wouldn't mind Collapsed for sure, because you can just collapse this. You could go Collapse, Squawk, Turo, Gardy in that version of the deck, right? And completely remove the 2 prize liability from your board. I just think that the way that lists are built right now, it's not necessary.
Yeah, no, it makes a lot of sense. So kind of you talked about Sinnoh against Lugia. How do you feel about Enhanced? Enhanced for Sinnoh? Is there ever an argument to play both? How do you feel about that?
Yeah, there is an argument to play both, and I was for a minute playing both. I think a lot of people going in knew that Lugia was going to be the most played deck. And so for a moment, the argument for both is Arven makes energy disruption accessible and Temple makes energy disruption powerful, right? Because you cannot go stamp Hammer if they hands you, right? You can't do that because presumably they have Gift and Legacy. So then you have to choose between either getting rid of the Legacy and you could then go Screamtail KO the Archeops on the bench, which doesn't play around Roseanne's, right? You have the access to the Hammer, but depending on their techs, it might not be enough. And we saw my testing group's Lugia list playing the double lightning energy, which Hammer is completely useless against, right? And I would expect that a lot of Lugia's players are going to start playing a list like that, because Liam Halliburton as well. Yep. Their group also came to the same conclusion as us, which is Chinchino is cool, but its value is, significantly diminished by the fact that you have powerful basic Pokemon that you can use now, right?
Yeah, it's funny because that's my group. I didn't like their list, but they did all better than me.
I was the same. I was the exact same. I was a place ahead of Alex in the CP standings, and then he got top 32 and I got top 64. So now he's 1 ahead of me because he played the Lugia list and I decided to play Gardy. But yeah, I think Hammer is cool because it's accessible, right? And so a lot of times you can just go, Hammer the Legacy, snipe around. But I like Temple more just because I think oftentimes if you're going to stamp them anyway, you may as well just go Counter Catcher, kill the Arc with Gardy. Yeah. And then what do they do? And so then later in the game, when you find your Temple, then you can shut everything off, continue to disrupt them, and knock it out without having to worry about the Legacy, without having to worry about the Gift. The flip side of that coin, and something that I think more Gardevoir players should do, and I'm sorry, I know that I'm really drilling into this one. A lot of times what you can do instead is Gardevoir hit the hands, and then you can hammer the Mist energy, and Cresselia gets around Legacy and Gift.
Because
both of them need to be activated via damage, and so damage counters get through both. So you can hit the hands with Gardy, and then you can either go Monkey Gardy or you can go Cresselia, and it gets around it.
That makes a lot of sense. As my one pushback would be, like, if you're not taking a knockout, like on an Archeops, they can just go Chinchino if they do play it. But I guess against the builds, like Alex's build, for example, if they don't, if you're forcing a Weird Deer or something, then you just take all the.
You're forcing a Weird Deer,
like yeah. So.
Right, and Chinchino's not always accessible to them if you've gone like turn 2 Stamp, right?
Yeah, 100%. No, it makes a lot of sense to me. Like I think a lot of Lugia players, like myself included, like we all knew about the enhanced and Screamtail plays. Like I think a lot of good players, we all played Roseannes in our deck. Because we're just like, if you go enhanced Screamtail, I'm literally just gonna go Roseannes. The game's almost done. Yep. So
it's done. It is over in that moment.
Yeah. So I think the reason Sinnoh's nice is because late in the game, like you're saying, like you can go Sinnoh, take a knockout, don't activate Gift, and Lugia has trouble like drawing out of that. Like they have to draw Lumineon basically, or they have to draw like Boss Raw if they have an attacker. So it does buy you a turn normally, I think, at the end of the game. So I think Sinnoh makes a lot of sense, and it counters Jamming Tower as well.
Yep.
Sweet. I have a few more cards here. I have Rare Candy. So we saw Henry Brand's list play this one. How do you feel about Rare Candy? Or do you just think it's like too hard to play one candy and like make it work?
Yeah, I think Candy in a standard list is a little bit counterintuitive to the deck, because a lot of times the reason that you would want to use Candy is because you missed a lot of Curlias, right? And so you need to just like get straight to the Gardy. But if you missed a lot of Curlias, you probably don't have enough Psychic Energy to utilize the Gardy anyways. So I think oftentimes you would rather just have it be a consistency card and take the turn off. Because again, I think Gardy is a deck that oftentimes does not need to aggressively pressure early. It's nice when it does, but it's not necessary. In Henry's list, though, like that sort of turbo version where you're not looking for the late game comeback potential with the Drifloon and things like that, I could see it having value. But in a standard list, I don't think I would play the Rare Candies.
Yeah, I think that makes sense to me. How do you feel about Lost Vacuum? Like, could this ever take a Stadium spot? Like, it has maybe some utility mirror? Or no, you think Stadium's better?
I think anyone who has played a lot of Gardevoir Mirror knows that Vacuum is useless in the mirror. Like, you're not attacking with Bravery Charm Drifloon until you're winning the game. And so like you could do something like, a lot of Gardy players in the mirror will like Bravery Charm their Monkey, or like Bravery Charm something to keep it out of range of the opposing Monkey plus Flutter Mane. And so like it could see niche value there, but I don't know. The best like use case I found for Lost Vacuum is knocking out your own Pokemon to activate Counter Catcher. And like you're only playing 2 Bravery Charm, so I don't know, at that point like just play a second boss. It is nice because it's like you said, it's searchable Stadium bump, but again, I think Lugia lists are going to start to stray away from the like double triple jamming tower, because I just don't think it's that good.
It hurts consistency of the deck for sure. Cool. Okay, the last card here I wanted to ask is the Devolution TM. So we talked about Henry's list, how he was using that effectively. Do you think you need to play a list like Henry's to get like utility from this card, or do you think you can find utility from a normal build?
No, yeah, and you can. I mean, the Australians played it as well, and they were playing a normal build of the deck. I would say that the Australian list is like a perfect example of a list that utilizes Devo. I was preaching Devo. Some of you may remember me before Indy selling my, as Henry Chow puts it, my snake oil Gardy lists for $10, and that was Devo. Devo has like just a ridiculous amount of utility in so many matchups right now. It's insanely good into Mirror. It is insanely good into Zard. It's insanely good into Dragapult. It's really, really, especially right now, very, very good into Chien-Pao. And I didn't expect a ton of the Zard. I didn't expect a ton of the Chien-Pao. And even to some extent, I wasn't expecting Gardy to be like 15%. But if I was like given the meta percentages, I would have played Devo. there are just so many things that you can do with that card. Against Mirror, you can stall. Like if they go second and go Arven Evo, you can go evolve my Curlias Arven Devo and Devo the Curlias to force them to take a turn off. You can also do like ridiculous things in Mirror with the Devo. Henry's list specifically could take a completely clean board with like your opponent's board has no damage on it. He can go Monkey move 30, Monkey move 30, Turo Monkey, Rebench Monkey, Attach Dark, move 30 to Gardy Devo, kills the Gardy, removes all of the Curlias, and then your opponent literally cannot do anything, right? Like Devo just has so much utility in the mirror, and especially paired with Flutter against the Charizard matchup, which I would expect Charizard to see a huge rise in play going forward. The reason why I played Devo last format, right, against the Charizard matchup is because if you counter catch your Charmeleon and then Devo with Flutter Mane, it gets around Flare Veil. And especially now, you can go like, you know, set up the barrel with 60 damage and then bring up the Charmeleon, unfair stamp them and Devo, and it like the game is over, right? If I could go back and resubmit my NAIC list and play the tournament again, I would play Devo.
Okay.
Yeah, that card is really good.
Sweet. So we've kind of like spent a lot of time now going over all these cards. I think it's really helpful to like what I really like, and I think people like as well, is like going through each card and explaining why you wouldn't play it. Because I think a lot of people just like go on Limitless, get lists, like they don't really understand like the thought process of like how you pick which cards go in, which metas. So now you've kind of mentioned like with some knowledge and all that. So I have your list pulled up. I think this is your list from NAIC. So you kind of said you play Devo. Is there anything else you would change? So if you tell the viewers right now, what to you is the optimal Gardy 60?
Yeah, I think had I had the Australian list, I probably would have played that.
So their list exactly. So like,
yeah, almost exactly. Like I said, I do kind of prefer the Temple of Sinnoh over the Enhanced Hammer, but I really like the way that they've sort of structured their version of the deck. I think technically Double Monkey was probably optimal for the tournament. I still have not played a ton of Double Monkey. I think the reason it was optimal for the tournament is because, similar to myself, I think a lot of other Gardy players did not practice that version of the mirror. Because if you play the mirror the way that you would in a standard mirror, and chase the Curlias, I think you lose like really, really badly against the Double Monkey list. In my testing since then, I was playing some like Limitless tournaments the past couple of days, and I've hit a couple of the Double Monkey builds. I think you're supposed to aggressively chase Monkey, and just like make it so that they can never have two of them at once. And I think that having the Devo as your mirror tech and then playing this list while aggressively chasing monkeys is probably pretty close to optimal.
So would you say would you cut the Enhanced Hammer and then Artisan for a Sinnoh and a second Monkey? Is that how you would like to play the deck? Or do you think just Devo is enough instead of two Monkeys?
I think if I was going to like change this list to make it more something that I would like, the actual truth is that I would just take a Psychic out of my list and add the Devo. Because on this list, what I would probably do is go minus Artisan for Temple and minus Hammer for the second Turo. And maybe that's biased based on what I hit, because I hit a ridiculous amount of Dragapult. I hit like 5 of them. I hit 5 Lost Box, 5 Dragapult, and 2 of them were the same deck. I hit double Pult Lost Box, and then 3 other Dragapults and 3 other Lost Box. So I think the double Turo had a lot of value in my list. But yeah, if I was suggesting people to pick up Gardevoir, the Australian list is the one that I would point to.
Sweet. That makes a lot of sense. I had some questions about card counts, but we almost hit all of them. So just one last one I wanted to ask is, do you think 2 Vessel needs to be stapled in the deck? Can you ever get away with 1?
Yes.
Yeah?
You can get away with 1, but I would not do it.
Okay. That makes sense. And then I was going to ask if you should play like the Monkey Count. I think you said that it's really strong, but you said like you can kind of get around the utility by playing like Devo, for example. So how do you feel about that?
Yep. I think Double Monkey, again, is really good, especially as a surprise factor. My only 2 losses in day 2 were to Henry and Kaido, who both played Double Monkey Gardevoir. I think dependent on sort of what we're expecting in the meta, and especially if you're playing Henry's iteration of the deck, like that control style Gardy, I think you do need Double Monkey. But I don't know. I'm 50-50 on it. If you like Double Monkey, play Double Monkey, but I don't think it's necessary to win the mirror. I don't think it's necessary to beat any of the matchups that, Double Monkey is for.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. Cool. So yeah, I think we spent a lot of time there on how to build your Gardevoir deck. So hopefully if you're watching this or listening, you have a pretty good idea of how you want to build it and like got some really good takeaways. So next I want to move into what I think is debatable. I wouldn't say the most important, probably equally as important is how you actually play your matchups out. So I've pulled out most of the matchups. Some of them I have a sim ready if you want to go over, like if you give me like examples, I can pull up board states and stuff.
Sure.
So I want to start with the mirror. We've discussed it a lot already. I think this is probably the most intricate matchup. Would you agree, of like all the matchups it has?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, so I have just like some questions I listed out for you. I didn't think of everything, so you can tell me what you think is important. So I guess the one I want to start with is, like, do you prefer playing from ahead or do you prefer playing from like behind in this matchup?
I don't think it matters. I think actually it's fine to do both. I think if you're playing Double Monkey, you want to play from behind, pretty much always, because then you want to take the prize swing with the Double Monkey later in the game, so there's less time for a response. But in a standard list, I think both are reasonable. I think it's less about like where you are in the prize trade and more about where you are in board state. Like, I would favor somebody behind in prizes that has more Curlias than I would like somebody ahead in prizes with less of them, right?
Yeah.
Because they're going to be more vulnerable. Typically, I do not like try to sack a prize, I guess. So I guess the answer is I prefer to play from ahead, because I never go into the match going, okay, I'm going to let my opponent take the first prize. Yeah,
I think that makes a lot of sense. I think when you play from ahead too, it's like if you can ever make that like 3 prize separation, like you can ever like boss a Gardy and make 3 prizes, then I feel like you kind of like just take complete control of the game. And when you're playing from behind, it's almost like you're trying to like, you get the counter catcher, so you can kind of like take out the Curlias more easily, Munkidori if you want to take that out. So the matchup plays so differently depending on where you play from. But I would say the person who plays from behind, you're kind of on a clock where your opponent can like eventually like put the game out of reach if you're not careful. Right. So I guess my follow-up would then be like, in this matchup, like who are you targeting? Are you targeting Curlia? Are you targeting Munkidori? Are you ever targeting whatever they're attacking with? What's your general priority list? I know it changes like depending on the specific scenario, but just in general.
Yeah, typically in Mirror you target Curlias. And now, because Cresselia is popular in the deck again, like the counter catcher is not as important because you can just like cress around it and things like that. Yeah, typically in the matchup you want to target Curlias. I know that's crazy. Like, who would have thought target Curlias in Mirror? But against the Double Monkey, it depends on their board state. If they have the ability and like the bench space to put down second Monkey, that means that they probably have fewer Curlias in play. And so then I would probably target down the Monkey. That's kind of what I did not do this at NAIC. I played the normal pretty standard. And I think I regret it, because in order to have the bench space for the second Monkey, they need to remove something from somewhere else, right? And so a lot of times, you're going to be able to like afford to leave some Curlias alive. So if they have the ability to double Monkey, I would get rid of the Monkey. If they just have the one, though, I think it's fine. Like, you don't really care if they just have one, because you have it too.
Yeah,
you can just pass your 30 damage back and forth.
That makes sense. I guess another question I had is, like, do you ever attack with Gardevoir? So a lot of the cards in Gardevoir, like Cress, Screamtail, it goes around Gardevoir, and if you put your Gardevoir forward, they can't really knock it out without using Drifloon. But then you're giving yourself like a 2 prize liability. So are there ever scenarios where you attack with Gardevoir, maybe like early in the game or like late in the game, or do you always try and use your like niche attackers like the Crest, the Screamtail, the Flutter Manes instead?
Yeah, I think the biggest point to avoid attacking with Gardevoir is the mid game. In the early game, you can use it because a lot of times it's going to be hard for them to get enough resources, especially if you're taking like the first knockout, right? It's going to be hard for them to immediately respond and KO it. And even if they do, sometimes you can just like, monkey 30 to the Drifloon and then take 2 prizes anyway. So you're not too worried about attacking with Gardevoir in the early game if you have to. Usually, though, if you're attacking with Gardevoir early, you're not killing a Kirlia. So, evaluate the board state before doing that. You don't necessarily want to attack with Gardy in the mid game because it's much, much, much easier for them to respond to it. Especially because they can go it's a lot easier for them to go respond and unfair stamp you at the same time. But then late game, because usually in the late game, both of your boards are completely disparaged of Kirlias, you can more often afford to go, knock out their active with Gardy and Stamp or Iono, and it'll be a lot harder for them to respond to it.
Yeah.
So it's a parabola of when it's better to attack with it.
Yeah. Cool. I kind of set this up just baseline. I basically just made a mirrored board. It's if this happens in a game, how do you pick what to attack with first? Would you Scream Tail a Kirlia? Would you Cresselia a Kirlia? Would you, I don't know, just knock out their active Flutter Mane? Kind of what goes through your head when you get the option of getting that first knockout in? Yeah,
the first thing that's going through my head is that I have an invalid deck list. Because there's double Ralts in hand and 3 Kirlias on the bench. But I think in this position, you have to obviously... Okay, so have I supported this turn?
Ignore what your hand is. I'm just saying, this is
ignore?
I just put... The reason you have an invalid deck is I just pulled these from the deck. But,
I see.
I'm just saying, if this position came up and, you could, pick, for example, what to attack with. You haven't played anything yet. You just drew for your turn, let's say. How do you kind of pick, what I'm attacking with, who I'm taking out, stuff like that?
Yeah, I think it doesn't necessarily matter what you attack with here. If they don't have Manaphy on the bench, I'd probably lean towards attacking with Screamtail and just killing a Kirlia. I don't see a great reason not to in this position. But if that's not feasible, it's one thing for you to just boss out. Okay, with Manaphy, then it becomes a little bit more complex, right?
Yeah, so
because if they have Manaphy, depending on the amount of energy that you have in your at your disposal, basically, you can, if you have, say, 3 energy in your discard pile, you can get 1 to the Flutter, and then you can go, 1 to Cress, 1 to Gardy, 1 to a Kirlia, and you can Cress kill a Kirlia. If that is not feasible, though, what I would use to kill this Flutter Mane is my Flutter Mane. If I cannot target down a Kirlia, I would use my Flutter Mane to knock out their Flutter Mane, especially because they don't have Munkidori established yet. That allows me to then probably try and establish my Munkidori, right? This turn I would prioritize establishing my own Munkidori, because then what you can do is you can go accelerate 3 energy to the Flutter, or 2 energy, whatever you have access to. You can move 30 to a Kirlia, knock out the active and put 20 on that same Kirlia. Which then means they have to either evolve that Kirlia or they have to find their monkey that turn. Otherwise, you can take the extra knockout with your monkey on the following turn. And putting pressure on the Kirlias in that way is going to be really helpful. And that's kind of why Flutter Mane is such a strong attacker in the mirror, is because you set up scenarios where, if you move 30 from your board to one Pokemon, and then you Flutter Mane 20 to another Pokemon, they have to choose what they're going to remove with their Munkidori.
Okay. So you're saying, so basically just to make sure I got this right. So you're saying, in this scenario, if you had to attack with Flutter, you'd want to go Monkey, Knockout, put effectively 50 on one of the Kirlias, like this.
Right, exactly.
Okay.
Because this is effective in 2 ways. I know I just said splitting damage is good to play around Munkidori, but for this situation specifically, if they do find the Munkidori and move 30, you can make a play, which I love to do in the mirror, which is Monkey Turo Monkey, where you go accelerate 2 energy to the monkey to put 40 on it, move 30 to the Kirlia, Turo the monkey, rebench, reattach the dark, and then knock out the Kirlia. And that's something that you can do all the time thanks to Flutter Mane, because any point, especially when you're behind, you can go countercatcher a clean Kirlia, move 30 to it, Turo, move 30 to it, and then Flutter Mane knocks out the active Kirlia, and the extra 20 knocks out the bench Kirlia as well.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So I'm just going to visualize it for me. So you have your monkey here. You have to have a second dark, I guess, or a vessel in your hand to do this. But
yep.
So you would put energies on it. Let's put 2. So you have 40, for example. Their board, your opponent's board is clean. You can move 30 to one of the Kirlias, so it takes 30.
Yep.
You Turo the monkey, so it goes back to your hand, and the energies go away. Then let's just say we have another Dark in our hand. Now instead you get your Flutter Mane ready, and you can heal the Flutter Mane instead, which is better. So it would have 60, so we'd heal it to 30. You put the extra 60 here. And then if you're behind, you counter catcher, you can take out 2 Curlias. If you're ahead, like in this scenario, you take out 2 prizes at once and take a 2 prize lead.
Right.
Which is, I think, such a powerful thing to do. I guess if you put a double monkey build, like you could triple monkey, I guess, in a turn, or you could just just do this without having to throw. Which is super powerful.
Very, very strong.
Yeah, another question I wanted to ask you is, do you bench Manaphy in this matchup? So I know bench spots are like such an important thing with this deck, right? You want to have a bench spot for Monkey, you want to have him for, if you could, I guess, like 4 Curlias. Do you preemptively bench Manaphy, or do you like just concede like that you can bench something else and let your opponent scream tail? What do you think?
It depends. I think if you have easy access to Manaphy and you have the ability to utilize that bench spot for Manaphy, it's fine. The issue in this matchup is a lot of times what you want on your board is Munkidori, as many Curlias as possible, and then what you're attacking with. And so if you started with Ralts or Flutter or Monkey, you have that extra bench spot to play the Manaphy. But if you started with like Radiant Greninja, it's a lot more difficult to like utilize that bench space in that way, right? And so it depends on where you are at the game. I would typically prioritize getting Ralts out over the Manaphy. And if you're worried about the Scream Tail, then you can get the Manaphy later on. So it depends.
No, that makes sense. I think another thing to call out is if your opponent attacks with Scream Tail, hopefully it's not in the prizes, and you need 40 to knock out a Curlia, right? So one thing is if you're losing, you can like counter catcher a Curlia, and then you can Munkidori 30 to the Scream Tail, and then you can take double knockout this way. So that's just one thing to be aware of. If you're attacking with Scream Tail, you're against it. It is actually pretty easy to double up a turn if your opponent attacks with Scream Tail. Cool. And the last thing I wanted to ask you, sorry, did you have a point on that?
Yeah, I was going to say, this is like one of the most common ways people play the matchup. And like I said earlier, you don't usually need the Bravery Charm until late game to KO the Gardevoir. And so if you are in this position, right, and you are attacking with Scream Tail, if you have the Charm in hand, attach it.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. Because then you basically force your opponent to like knock it out with like Flutter or something that they don't really want to do. Cool. I guess the last thing I wanted to ask you is, if you attack with Cress, are you ever worried, like especially early in the game, like you're spreading your energy too far across the board and you're gonna have trouble getting them off? Or do you just think the ability to knock out a Curlia is too good to pass up? So I'll just go back to like that example earlier, like where our opponent's board looks something like this, and you have the option to like Cresselia. Like, do you think it's worth it? Like, let's say we have 3 energies in the discard.
Do I have double Curlia on my bench?
Yeah, you have double Curlia, and we're gonna evolve, or something like this.
I think you go for it. Because one of 2 things is going to happen, right? One, maybe you have an Arven in hand, you can find a Vessel, whatever. It's like not that hard to find energy in the deck. But the other thing is like, what is my opponent then doing? Because if the answer is that my opponent is going to then respond by going, their own Cresselia, like I have guaranteed access to 2 energy, so all I need to do is find 1 more, and then I can just kill the Cress, right? Like, it's not that difficult once you're at 3 to then get to 4. If your prizes are really like bad, or your hand is really bad, maybe I wouldn't go for the Cress. But I think that more often than not, you removing your opponent's draw options is just like very, very strong. Because if they don't take a knockout, then great, right? If they don't respond by taking a knockout, you don't really care if you miss an attack the next turn. Like, it doesn't matter that much. And you can just go back into the Flutter or whatever, right?
Yeah.
And if they do take a knockout, you can always Arven for Vessel, or you can Arven for Unfair Stamp, right? Because if you've killed a Curlia and they only have 3 on their bench, they have to evolve one of them into Gardy. And so then if you stamp them and find a way to kill the last Curlia, their deck is done, right? No Curlias is miserable in the mirror.
Yeah, I think it makes a lot of sense. I think the other thing too is like, if you're attacking with Cress, for example, in this scenario, like your Curlias are going to have energies. So if your opponent wants to knock out one of your Curlias, like they're going to put 1 back in the discard for you.
Right. And so you should always, exactly like you're saying, you should always, like, I've seen a lot of people commit the energy to the Gardevoir in this situation, and I just don't think you need to.
No.
Especially if you have double Turo. Because, what they might do in this situation, right, is they might go unfair stamp, counter catcher up your Gardy, and shut off your Gardy with the Flutter Mane. But you can always evolve one of your benched Kirlias into a second Gardevoir. You have double Turo in your deck to potentially remove as well. So I would say generally it's going to be better to commit those energies to the Kirlia.
Yeah, and like you said, like we say disruption like always with Gardevoir, especially in Mirror. It's the same idea, right? Like you keep spamming Iono's unfair stamps. Like if you stick your opponent one turn, like you just get so far ahead. And I think that was actually a cool play that I wanted to talk about. You said is like one thing you can do in the Mirror is like if you like gust up the Gardy, like maybe they have their other one in the discard or something, they refinemented it. Like Flutter Mane shuts it off. So if you combine this with like Unfair Stamp or like Iono, especially if you play Devo, like this can buy you a lot of turns late in the game to mount your comebacks. So.
And actually, this play is one of the reasons why Double Monkey is so strong in the Mirror. Because a lot of times what you want to do in the typical Mirror is kill all of their Kirlias and then make this play, right? Because then there's nothing they can do unless they draw the Turo Raw. But if they draw it and they don't have a Kirlia, they can't Gardevoir, right? And this is why Double Monkey can be so strong in that aspect, is because if they're attacking you with Flutter Mane, you're just taking 60 of the damage they did and putting it right back on their field.
Yeah, exactly. So, I think this mirror is like very intricate. Like there's so many scenarios that can come up. So hopefully we highlighted a lot of things to consider. But definitely practice this matchup if you want to play Gardevoir. I don't think we're going to spend as much time on the other matchups. I just wanted to spend a lot of time on this one because I thought it was really intricate. Cool. Yeah, so the next one I have is Lost Box, since I think that won the tournament. I think it's probably pretty popular. So I have a couple questions. So I think we kind of already talked about how Klefki swings the matchup, and you kind of said like how he hits a liability. But my biggest thing I wanted to ask you is how does this matchup go when you're like first versus second? Like when they get to like if they go first, like use like for example a couple of flower selects before you can Flutter Mane, and then how much different is it when you get to go first and put the Flutter Mane? So why don't we start there, and then maybe like you can like describe both, like I guess past like how the game goes depending on how the game started.
Yeah, so if you go first against the Lost Box matchup, even if you don't get the Flutter into the active, it gives you a chance to like, how do I put this? So the reason why last format you would choose first with Gardevoir is because in theory, if you go first, you have more opportunities to set up. Against Lost Box, you have that aspect, but you also have the aspect of potentially sticking Klefki or Flutter Mane in the active to just completely lock them, right? Something that's really, really important in this matchup is an acknowledgement that Lost Box can just run you down really quickly. And so even if you're not playing Klefki, I usually choose first in this matchup, because then it's a lot more likely that on turn 2, I'm going to be able to, both Arven for Evo and establish a Manaphy to play around the Radiant Greninja. Versus if I go second, I have to have all of it in my opening hand, or else my opponent is just going to win the game, right? If you go second and you are able to establish that Flutter Mane in the active, it's also more likely that your opponent is going to be able to utilize resources that they've garnered from the first turn as well as the second turn to find the Iron Bundle. That's kind of the nice thing about Flutter Mane is like, even if they find the bundle, a lot of times they're then using resources that they would rather commit to like getting Radiant Greninja, right? They would rather Artisan for Comfy or Cramorant, but they have to commit that to the Iron Bundle. And so it's a lot harder for them to spike you the way that they would in a typical matchup, right?
Yeah.
I think Klefki makes the matchup more early game centric because you can Buddy Poffin for it, right? And it shuts off the ninja, it shuts off the bundle, and so a lot of what they're doing relies on their opening hand, right? Whereas Flutter Mane, I think, makes the matchup a lot more mid and late game centric.
I think that makes sense. So let me ask you a question like this. Like, let's say this was your opening... Oops, did not mean to stack these. Let's say, like, this is your opening board and you're going second, and you have, like, Arven. Are you going for an Evo play in this scenario, or are you going to, like, retreat the Flutter Mane? Like, are you okay... Yeah, ask a question.
Do I play Klefki or no?
No, let's say no Klefki.
I'm Arvening for Evo in this situation every time.
Okay, so you're
it's too easy for them to get around Flutter Mane in this position.
Okay, so you think you just need to like set up your board, and then like later on you can go, for example, like Unfair Stamp Flutter, and that's what you're trying to work towards?
Yeah.
Okay, I think that makes sense. So would you say like maybe in this matchup then, like if you don't get that hard lock turn 1, like your win condition kind of pivots to that Unfair Stamp into Flutter? Is that what you would say the game normally goes?
Yeah.
Okay, so you basically go like, I don't know, say we Evo turn 1, like I don't know, like they crammed or something, Monkey, and then like basically you're just saying from this position, like you just go like Unfair Stamp, Flutter, and then like you try and like see if you can brick them, and then you just go Iono spam from there, like just keep trying to brick them every turn.
Yeah, it depends. It does depend, right?
Yeah.
If they cram killed the monkey, then yes, I think you go Flutter Unfair Stamp. More often than not, what is going to happen is because they've had 2 turns of not being Flutter locked, is they're going to amp the Munkidori. That is typically how the matchup goes, is they'll take 2 prizes on the Munkidori, and so then you cannot respond with Flutter Mane, right?
Okay.
So then what you're supposed to do is, in this situation, you would have to get the Super Rod and like put the monkey back in your deck. But what you want to do in this position is you want to Iono or Stamp them and hit with Gardy, move 30 to it with Munkidori, so it's at 220. And 220 is a perfect number against Iron Hands, where even if they switch cart, then on the following turn, what you can do is you can, if the hand stays in the active and just hits your Gardy, then you just monkey kill it, or you counter catcher around it, and then you can go Flutter, KO a Comfy, and KO the hands at the same time. So you establish the Flutter Mane lock, you remove the threat of Iron Hands, and theoretically you can disrupt them all in the same turn. And that is a much more consistent lock against them than the early stamp. Because I know we talked earlier about like a lot of times Unfair Stamp is better early because they haven't had the opportunity to thin. But in this matchup specifically, a lot of times their thinning involves them getting rid of their Colresses. And so later in the game, they're going to be much less likely to draw into outs to a Flutter Mane lock at the end of the game.
That makes sense. Yeah, so I really like that, because like when they have the Iron Hands and the active with the Gardy, it's like they normally play like 1 copy of Boss plus Prime Catcher, so it's really hard for them to like get another knockout off. And like you're saying, like no matter what, even with the switch cart, like because you're saying like even though it looks like it's at 190, it's at a monkey range. Flutter just does 20, so you can just monkey plus Flutter. So
exactly.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. So I guess this matchup's more about, it's like looking for opportunities to either like deny them prizes and then eventually like try and find ways to lock them creatively. Is the way to go about it, because they actually don't play a way to one-shot Gardevoir in their deck unless they're playing like the dark version, which Hedrick didn't play, so I assume people won't play.
I think it's just not very good right now, right? Like you don't need the Roaring Moon in so many matchups. Another really nice thing about Flutter Mane specifically is it literally deals with all 3 of their 2 prize attackers. It shuts off Iron Thorns, so they cannot lock Gardy. You do this play to kill the Iron Hands, and then it shuts off Blood Moon or Saluda's ability. So they need 5 energy to attack.
Yeah, so like basically like they have to like if they bundle once, like they have to put a lot of resources into getting it back, and if you're just disrupting them, like it's really hard for them to keep spamming bundle over and over. And I guess late in the game, like let me ask you this, like if they bundle, are you normally promoting Gardevoir? Is like that what you promote to try and like block taking a knockout?
Yeah, 100%. Especially with double Turo, like if they have no way to kill Gardy and I just put it up and they go 240, I'm like, oh okay, well Turo, Flutter Mane, Iono. Well, you can't Iono, I guess, but Turo, Flutter Mane, and they're like, oh well, now I have to move my giant Blood Moon or Saluna because it can't attack the Misdreavus.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I guess maybe the last thing to ask you is like, how do you play around Sableye? Or you just like you just need to like eventually just knock it out with Flutter Mane and hope they can't keep recycling it?
I actually think Sableye doesn't do very much in the matchup. The main way, right, for you to play around Sableye is to put Bravery Charm on your Munkidori late in the game once they've had to use their Lost Vacuums, right? Because Munkidori is going to be like the predominant way that you deal with the residual damage from Sableye. So you can Bravery Charm Flutter, or you can Bravery Charm Munkidori, whatever is a more like premium attacker on your side of the board, or a resource, I guess. You wouldn't really attack with Munkidori. unless you're Stefan confusing the Iron Hands. So yeah, I think Bravery Charm is a good way to play around Sableye, but you'd be surprised how little Sableye comes up in the matchup actually. Like maybe they use it like once to kill a Curlia, or maybe they use it to kill your Munkidori once. But because Flutter Mane one-shots the Sableye, like it's like, yeah, like you took a prize, happy for you, but I'm just going to continue to Flutter Lock you. Good luck getting it back. Yeah,
I think just like Lost Box, like it's a combo deck almost. So like the more you Flutter Lock, the more you disrupt. Like eventually, like they're not going to draw Colress plus Super Rod plus Gate plus Nestball. Like,
right.
So no, I think that makes a lot of sense. Cool. All right, next matchup I have for us is Lugia. I think I have it set. No, in this one. Yeah, I have Lugia set up. I just put a random scenario here, but we've already discussed the Lugia matchup a lot, but I kind of wanted to just like jump. Like this is, I think, a common scenario that comes up a lot. So like, let's say they're about to like Iron Hands your Waltz here, for example, and they're about to take 2. How do you proceed from like this position, assuming they take the 2 prizes here? They're fully set up and like they're like this.
So this situation is worst case scenario.
Yeah, that's why I picked this one.
Yeah. Somebody brought this up in my masterclass and was like this happened to me. What do I do? And my immediate response was they never have this, which is, I mean, like mathematically probably not true, right? Like they can get to this point. The conclusion that I came to is if the rat is still a Minccino, Unfair Stamp, Countercatcher Archeops, kill it with Gardy EX is the answer. If the rat is a Chinchino, it becomes more complicated. And I think at that point, what you're supposed to do is Arven for the hammer the legacy, and Screamtail snipe the Archeops instead. Because then they need like a lot more resources, right? You don't necessarily need to stamp. A lot of times if they've gotten to this board position, they have used all of their resources, right? If they have Iron Hands attacking, Minccino with double energy, double Archeops, Lugia V-Star, a lot of times they don't have enough resources to go, okay, well, I'm gonna, Jet Energy my Chinchino, boss, and kill your Gardy. And if they do, and they don't find the Roseannes, right? If they kill the Gardy, then you can just Screamtail the other Archeops, and you still have a one prize board, right? So the answer either way is kill Archeops. It's just how you do it that changes, right?
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, because I guess if they play Roseanne's, like it's actually not like unwinnable if that happens. Like let's say I'll pull out Screamtail, so like if you like go enhance, like Screamtail the legacy, kill an Archeops. Like even if they go like fish for like Roseanne's, like put it back, take a knockout. I guess in the scenario they'd have. I'm not just gonna let them have raw Roseanne's. So right. And they go to 2, for example. Like the game's not done. Like you can still like play Iono here. You can play Stamp. You can play Countercatcher.
Right. In this specific situation, what you can do, because they have to use presumably their Archeops to reattach the legacy, they still only have 2 energy on the Chinchino, so you can then Iono Countercatcher the Archeops and kill it with Gardy EX.
Yeah.
And so they can only get to 210 in damage in this position, and then they're out of Archeops. So then all you need to do is like spam Disruption and like. My favorite thing that I say when people come to me with like crazy like board states like this where they're like, what do I do? I'm like, so this is your line, and then you pray for absolution. Like you just sit there and you're like please God, like they got everything else, don't give them boss. Like that's your win con, right? Is like if they've had to use one of their fish, right? You Iono them to 2. You're still not hitting the gift energies, like just pray. Like that's it.
Yeah, I mean, like as someone who played a lot of Lugia, like the matchup really did feel a lot of times I'm like, well, like I have a 1 or 2 turn window to just rip a boss here and I win if I get it. If not, like they're just gonna overrun my board, like they'll set up and like get through.
Right.
So Yeah, I think to me, the matchup I'd say is probably slightly Gardy favored. I just wanted to put a board like this because I wanted you to kind of describe like how you think about like these kind of scenarios where you're like on the back foot, but like we said, Gardy's a comeback deck. Like, what are the lines you have to come back?
Right.
Because most games, Lugia is just going to go like read the wind turn 2 or something. They're not going to pull off like a board like I just put together here. So
right. And I would like to say one of the things that we decided, if the Chinchino does not have a gift energy and it is their only rat in play, it is acceptable to kill the Chinchino
from like the original board, like you scream tail it or
okay. Right. From the original board, it is acceptable instead of Screamtail KO Archeops Hammer, you can go Gardy EX, Countercatcher the rat, and kill it. Especially if you're Ionoing or Unfair Stamping, it's acceptable to kill rat there because then, again, they have to draw boss to attack with Amp. And you've completely eliminated a lot of the ways that you beat Lugia is you just completely eliminate all of their ways to deal with Gardy EX.
Yeah, it makes sense. Like, yeah, once one Archeops goes down, like they're kind of on life support, like, and then once you take out the second one or you take out the rat, like you said, it's like it's actually impossible for them unless they're playing the weird ear build. Right. Which even then, like, if you take out the Archeops, they still need a lot of energies to take a one shot on Gardy. So
which is why we played the Drapion. Despite what has been said on Twitter, it is not for the Mew VMAX matchup. It is for when Gardevoir KOs an Archeops because you can just attach double DTE to the Drapion and kill the Gardy.
Nice. So, yeah, I'd say, like, overall takeaways from this matchup, find ways to eliminate Archeops, find ways to get rid of the Legacy Energy. Late in the game, like, if you have Sinnoh in your deck as well, or you just play Sinnoh, like, Sinnoh Disruption's, like, insane. Sweet. So I think we've hit, like, probably the biggest matchup. I think the last one that's a big meta share is the Raging Bolt. I can pull up the sim, but I feel like this one's pretty simple. Like, what do you think is just how the Raging Bolt matchup goes?
Usually they're going to go ahead 2 prizes. And then you just like kill things with your 1 prizers. Sometimes they don't even go ahead 2 prizes though. The deck is like basically it's very consistent, but the hands where they brick, like that's it. Like they're not doing anything, right? And realistically, the matchup kind of sways of like if they take 3 prizes before you take a prize, you can still win. If they take 4 prizes before you take a prize, it's probably chalked. Like there are still lines, but you asked about like when to scoop earlier. If Raging Bolt goes 4 prizes ahead, you should probably scoop.
Yeah. So actually, I was just saying, let me make a board where they take a 3 prize, for example, before you take a prize. So would this actually be an example of a game where you need to get a single prize board going? Like you can't afford to leave a Gardevoir in play when they have a 3 prize lead like this. So I don't know, like. Just like let's say this is your board. They just took their 3rd prize. Like I'll just give them like whatever here. They can have like this.
Yeah, so I think the answer kind of depends on whether or not you have access to Stamp.
Mm-hmm.
If you have access to Stamp, I think it's fine when you take your first 2 prizes to leave the Guardian play, especially if you're killing a Raging Bolt, because then more likely than not, right? They're not going to find a way to kill a Gardy from clean. They would have needed to be unfair stamped into like exactly like energy Sada 2nd Raging Bolt, and then they need to Sada into like catcher flip heads, right? It's so unlikely for them to find it in that position, especially if their board is cleared of energy. And if they got it like that, they got it like that, right?
Yeah, 100%.
But even in some situations, right, like if they do find it and you're at 4 prizes and they're at 1, you can even go like, Counter Catcher the Greninja, Iono, and Screamtail KO the Bolt, right? And if they don't find energy plus Sada, you win in that position, right? It's kind of the same logic as like the Ancient Box matchup where like, yeah, they can one-shot your stuff, but late game, if you disrupt them and Counter Catcher Ninja, they can't Sada to Ninja, which means that they have to commit an attachment to the Ninja, or they have to raw draw into the switch card, right?
Yeah. Yeah, like you're saying, like if they have like a naked bolt, like you actually can't Sada plus attach if you have the Greninja inactive. They have to draw switch card. So.
Right. Yeah. Right. They have to draw the switch card of the Prime Catcher, and a lot of times by that point, their deck is like so disparaged of resources because they've been turboing through their deck the whole game, right? So you can win from like like really any position when they're at 3 prizes. Technically, when they're at 2 prizes as well, you can still win. You can do like kind of the same thing. But yeah, I think typically, like we were saying earlier, right? Like you're favored into Bolt. If you set up, you're probably going to win. So at that point, it might be valuable enough to just like concede.
Yeah. I mean, I will say this matchup's like actually pretty quick. So like as long as there's like probably like even like 15 minutes, like if you play fast, I think you can actually win. Because like they're always going to have 2 prizes on the board for you to take out.
That's true. And when time is called, like in 2 turns, you're taking 4 prizes, right? Yeah. Like that's 2/3 of a game in time. So
yeah, exactly. So yeah, it's still winnable. One thing I will call out is Ogerpon, you can't hit it with Scream Tail if it's on the bench. So remember that if you're playing. Because it doesn't seem like it would have that ability, but it has that ability. So
yeah. Oh, and play around. Okay, so a really important thing that people like don't do in this matchup for some reason is like you can play around Lost Vacuum. Monkey makes it so that both Gardy and Drifloon can one-shot an Ogerpon without a tool. It puts it at exactly 180. So you don't need to play into the Lost Vacuum 3 prize turn. You can just like counter catcher up the Ogerpon, Monkey 30 to it, and then hit for 180, and that knocks it out. And it's the same with Gardevoir. Gardevoir can do that as well. You can preempt on the Raging Bolt as well. You can move 30 the turn before, and then the next turn 30, and then again Drifloon one-shots it with no tool.
Yeah.
And Scream Tail one-shots Squawkabily with no tool as well.
And they're almost always going to have
That's not new.
Yeah, so I think, like the play Josh just described, like if you're going from like 4 to 2 and your opponent's at 3, if you can do this like counter catcher like 30, like just do it. Like don't even give your opponent the option to go Vacuum Boss or Vacuum Prime Catcher. Like it's just safest to just do this. Right. Because then you basically have checkmate on them. So
cool. Exactly.
Okay, next matchup I want to talk about is, let's talk about another Iron Hands matchup, like Miraidon. You've kind of described some plays to deal with Iron Hands again, so like I kind of just made another example board like for you, like so like how do you kind of play around like for example like Heavy Baton? So I guess this kind of goes into the Future Hand matchup as well. Like how would you deal with like, let's say this is your opponent's second turn, like you just Evo turn 1 or something, or I don't know why I give you 3 Curlies, but like let's just say you get 3 and they take 2.
Right.
Like what are you kind of looking for in like a position like this?
Yeah, so you kind of have 2 options for dealing with Heavy Baton, both in this matchup and the Future Hands matchup. In the Future Hands matchup, 1 is usually better. In this matchup, 1 is usually better, and they are different, in my opinion. In this matchup, I think a lot of times what you want to do is what you did against Lost Box, where you hit him with the Unfair Stamp, go Monkey, move 30, hit with Gardy, right? I think typically that is going to be your best way to deal with Miraidon, because oftentimes then what you can do is you can knock out both Iron Hands in the same turn. Because more likely than not, like Ciaran has it here, right? There's an Iron Hands in the active, there's an Iron Hands on the bench. It's way, 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 way easier for Miraidon to set up a second Iron Hands than it is for Future Hands to. And so a lot of times your best route is in this position. You're going to go, Artisan for Monkey, attach the Dark, evolve to Gardy, smack, move 30, right? An Unfair Stamp. That's important. Unfair Stamp or Iono if you can, right? And then even if they find the boss, right? Even if they're able to find the boss and go down to 2 prizes, you're taking a 4 prize turn. And you can even like present a 1 prize board to them in that scenario, right? You can Turo up the Gardy and then, they go down to 1 and then you take your last 2. And so this is typically what I would do in the Miraidon matchup specifically. And even if they, if you went first and they took 4 prizes before you can do this, this is still fine. You just have to hope they don't have boss. That's kind of it, right? In the Future Hands matchup, it is much less likely for them to accelerate into generators that quickly. And so a lot of times what you want to do instead, to get around the Heavy Baton, is you want to counter catcher up one of their Iron Crowns that doesn't have a booster energy on it, and you want to Scream Tail the hands that's on the bench, because Heavy Baton only activates in the active spot. And so then typically what'll happen is they'll have to, in order to respond, especially if you disrupt them, because they have a lot of dead cards in their deck. In order to respond, they have to knock out your Screamtail with Miraidon. And if they're doing that, then you can, Super Rod Screamtail back in and snipe the Iron Hands again. You can boss up the Iron Hands and kill with Drifloon, because a lot of times, if they have to Miraidon and you disrupted them, they're not going to have another, right? They don't have Miraidon. They can't just search out another Hands. They would need to have another Hands, another Heavy Baton, everything to respond. And so it's much easier to just kill all their Hands and push them out of the game than it is against Miraidon. I actually think that matchup is favored. I think Future Hands is a favored matchup for Gardy. I don't think Miraidon is, because they just have too many ways to turn one amp. And Future Box is not built to do that, right?
Yeah, they always have. They not always, but they most likely have to Miraidon turn one. So you get one extra turn at least to do it. So. And I guess the Miraidon, if they whiff turn one Hands, I feel like the matchup actually becomes, this scenario just becomes common, and I actually feel like you're probably favored actually from there if you can pull this off.
I think you just win. You don't even have to go for this play. If they miss turn one Hands, you can just kill whatever 2 prizers in their active. Sometimes it's because realistically, if they miss turn one Hands, they don't have Hands in the active, right? Yeah. So you're not going to go for this Gardy play. You'll probably just Drifloon whatever they have in the active.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. Cool. Okay, a couple more. I think I have Chien-Pao. So I have another board here. This is my favorite deck. So this is one matchup where I actually feel like I can contribute equally. But so I think historically, I would say this is a bad matchup. I'd still say it's probably slightly unfavored, but I do think Monkey's kind of changed it a bit. What do you think are some tricks to this matchup? You target Bibrals, you target Baxcaliburs. How do you kind of approach this?
Yeah, so this is actually maybe the most fluid matchup outside of Mirror. Because there's always a different optimal play depending on board state. Just looking at this board right now, I would probably lean towards, using Flutter Mane. Counter catching up the Barrel, using Monkey to move 30 to the Bidoof. And then you can, yeah. I'll let you set up a second. So yeah. So what you do, you Monkey move 30 to the Bidoof, and you hit the active for 90, and you put, so can you replace your benched Frigibax with the 70 HP Frigibax? Do you have it in the list?
Yeah, this one has it.
Yeah, because it is technically better for the Baxcalibur player to have the 70 HP one out, so you can't just double Monkey Screamtail the Baxcalibur. So in this specific situation, you can go 90 on the active and Unfair Stamp. They only have 2 cards. You shut off the Barrel's ability, and then you Flutter for 90, you put 10 on the Bidoof and 10 on the Frigibax. So then the Frigibax is essentially a 60 HP Frigibax. And then one of 2 things will happen. Either they will be Chien-Pao and they will not draw out of it because, all of their energies are probably in the discard at this point. And so there's not that many things that they can draw to get out of it. They would need to get they would need to draw Ultra Ball or an out to Ultra Ball essentially, right? Or, double energy, right? So they can retreat the backs. But this sets it up so that next turn, if they don't kill Flutter, you can go, draw for your turn, counter catcher something else that's not the Bidoof. Typically, it's probably going to be the Baxcalibur or something like that. And then you go Monkey move 30 to the Barrel, knock out the Barrel. You hit with Flutter Mane, knock out the Bidoof, and you do 90 to the active, and its ability is shut off. So all of their Barrels are gone, and they cannot use Super Cold unless they find another Candy Baxcalibur. I would probably not do this play as frequently if, say the Bidoof on the bench was a second Barrel. I probably wouldn't go for the play. I would probably just Screamtail snipe one of the Barrels. But basically the tier list of priorities is if you can kill both of the Baxcaliburs at once, or like Bax plus Fridge at once, you do that first. There's basically no situation where you will be able to do that, but like say your opponent like couldn't get the second Bax and you're able to go like, Monkey 2 turns straight, KO a Fridge, and then Screamtail KO with the Bax. That's technically your best play. But then immediately after that is like aggressively chase the barrels. And it's much easier to kill both. Like before you could not kill both barrels on the same turn, and now you can.
Yeah, 100%. Like the deck falls apart without a straw engine. Like you've kind of illustrated. Like if the only other thing, like if Chien-Pao hits the nuts, like they can like early Iron Hands you, I guess that makes the game a little more difficult.
It does.
And once you do take a knockout as a Chien-Pao player, I always suggest like you need to transition to Iron Hands as soon as you can in the middle of the game, because then you're not susceptible to your backs getting knocked out. So how do you deal with maybe like an Iron Hands in this matchup? Is it similar to what we've been doing? Like you attack with the Gardevoir.
Yep.
So you just go Gardevoir. Because Chien-Pao only really plays Bundle. In this case, their board's full and 1 Prime Catcher. So do you think you can transition to Gardevoir in this spot?
Right. If specifically this is their board, yeah, you go Gardy, and you attach a Bravery Charm to either the Monkey or the Flutter Mane. So if they do have the ability to bundle, right? If they for some reason like say
something like earlier, let's say
right. Say this is their board, right? Then you can, they bundle and you just push up the Flutter. And yeah, I would typically probably put Bravery Charm on Flutter instead of Monkey. I think that's probably better, because then, yeah, if they go, if they like want a Chien-Pao or something now that you've put up something they can't die, you shut off the Chien-Pao ability as well.
Yeah. Exactly.
But yeah, like this is any of the hands matchup. Hitting for 220 into hands is insane. But it's really, really good in Chien-Pao where they don't play Gust, not in a traditional sense, right? It's just the Prime Catcher. And if they're using Prime Catcher, it means that they need follow-up energy to retreat back into the hands.
Yeah, exactly. So, I would say, like, if Chien-Pao, like, just draws what they're supposed to draw, like, they'll win because they control the prize trade. But, like, basically as the Gardevoir player, like, you're just looking for as many ways as possible to just, like, destroy their engine. You get the Bibarel or the Bax. So just
exactly.
So yeah, Josh gave you some creative ways that you can go about it. Like you said, this matchup is very fluid. So it really depends on like what you're drawing, what they're drawing. But yeah, it's cool.
Yeah, and another interesting play you can make, like if your opponent has no Bibarels, right, and they just, because sometimes that happens, like they set up Bax and they set up a Chien-Pao just like enough to attack on a turn. It's totally fine to just kill the Chien-Pao, which you can do now with Gardy EX thanks to Munkidori. So say their board is like Chien-Pao in the active, Bax, Greninja, Bidoof, whatever else, right, on the bench. But they don't have draw. Disrupt plus kill Chien-Pao actually like completely eliminates their draw engine in that situation, right? Because they no longer have the Chien-Pao to like get energy out of their deck. So unless they draw into it naturally, they can't even Greninja in this spot.
Yeah, exactly. I agree. Cool. All right, I guess let's finish here with just like, we can rapid fire if you want, like Charizard or Charizard, Dragapult. I guess they're kind of the same deck almost now because people play them together.
Sure.
How does that matchup kind of change now that they have Dragapult like in the Charizard builds, and you're not? Let's say you're not playing Mimikyu, because I think most of the list didn't play Mimikyu.
They didn't, yeah. I think the predominant change in the Charizard and like Dragapult Charizard matchup, that Bibarel play that we just made, is really, really important. A lot of times what you want to do is you want to target their draw engine. So if they don't have Pidgeot, I did this against Tord. Tord's board was like double Pidgey, Bibarel, Mander, and I went Gust up the Bibarel. He took a knockout with Zard. I went Gust up Bibarel with Flutter Mane, move 30 to the Pidgey with 60 HP, unfair stamp, hit for 90, put 20 on the Pidgey with 60 HP. So his board was stuck. He couldn't add anything, so no Luminion. And then I went Counter Catcher the other Pidgey, Munkidori to the Bibarel, knockout, Flutter Mane, knockout both Pidgeys. And he was like, oh, okay. So like aggressively targeting down the draw engine is always going to be really, really strong. Because then when you inevitably go for the like big Drifloon to KO a Zard or KO a Dragapult or KO, Pidgeot, it's a lot harder for them to go for the like Vac boss play, basically, right?
Yeah.
So I'd say without the Mimikyu, you're turboing now, right? So last format you would choose first, so you could sit behind Mimikyu for a while and like slowly build up. Not anymore. You choose second. You get as many energy in the discard pile as fast as possible, and then you aggressively chase Pidgeot. If you can't aggressively chase Pidgeot, going for the Flutter Mane play on the barrel plus the stamp is very solid. If people are playing straight Dragapult, Gardevoir EX becomes your best attacker. But you can't do that in Pulsar because they'll just kill it with Charizard.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Cool, and I guess maybe last match here, like against Snorlax, just like what is your ideal 6 Pokemon when you play against Snorlax? Like how do you set up that board?
There is actually a perfect board, like an exactly perfect board. That actually I don't know if the Australian list can do with only 8 psychic energy or with only 7 psychic energy. I haven't thought about it because I always had 8. But with my list, your exact perfect board is Gardevoir, Psychic, Dark.
Okay. You can just describe it. I'll set it up while you're talking.
Okay. Yeah, so it's Gardevoir, Psychic, Dark. Ralts, Psychic. Drifloon, Psychic. And then Flutter Mane with nothing on it. And then you just use the 8th Psychic as like the flex spot on Flutter Mane. Like whenever they gust it up, you just Psychic
Embrace,
retreat.
In this scenario, I priced 4 prizes. 4 Psychic when I signed it up, but yeah, I get what you're saying.
Perfect. Typically, if you prize stuff, it's not too bad. Like you play Double Turo, you play Boss, so there's a lot of ways to draw your prizes. Like this is your ideal board, quote unquote, but like, it's flexible. Snorlax especially is not going to have everything they need every turn to punish you. They have to do like lots of random little stuff to deal with it. But this board in theory should never lose to Snorlax unless it takes you until you have like 8 cards in deck, and then in theory they can like Heroes Cape Chi-Yu spam you, I guess. But even if they do that, like if they do that, in theory, you can just like Turo up your Gardy, reset it, and then use Drifloon for 300, right?
Yeah, I think like you said, like you have 2 Turos basically buy you like turns if anything goes wrong. Plus you have Boss on Rotom if anything goes wrong. Like,
right, exactly. I think it's very hard to lose this matchup. You need a lot to go wrong, and by a lot to go wrong, basically what I mean is you start Crest, Screamtail, Greninja, or Manaphy, and then they flute 2 more of them. And really, even if they have Screamtail, it's not like that bad. So really, the worst case scenario is if you start Crest and then they flute Manaphy Greninja,
which is just like the nuts if they get that. Like
right, good for you. And you can still win. You just need them to miss like once, because you can go Boss KO Rotom, right? You can Boss Retreat KO Rotom, and then they gust it back up, and then you Turo that one KO. They gust something else up, you Turo that one and KO. And like technically Cresselia can attack, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, I think this matchup is very, very good for Gardy.
Yeah, I would agree with you there. What else was I saying else about this matchup? No, I think it's pretty good, like you said. And then, like just one thing I want to point out, like this is the ideal board. Like don't put the energies on the Pokemon until they need them. We just put them here, like in theory. Like let them get counter captured first, then put the energy down. Like save the energy first.
Yes, definitely that. Yeah.
Yeah. So cool. All right. I think we pretty much hit all the decks like you're expecting to see. Detailed matchup. So Josh, I took up a lot of your time, so I really, really do appreciate it.
Yeah, of course.
So like anything we missed, you can like say. Otherwise, like plug yourself. Like Josh is a great coach, everyone listening, so if you need help, like not just Gardevoir, like reach out to him. So Josh, man, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, if you're looking to do some coaching, you can find me on Metafy. I'm metafy.gg/@Josh-Frink. I do free coaching consultations. So if you're interested in just having a conversation about like your goals for the upcoming season or things like that, I'm happy to just sit and like have that conversation with you. And, even if you decide not to coach, that's what they're there for. You can find me on Twitter @DreamJew. And yeah, shout out to the Shuffle Squad for being a fantastic sponsor. Ciaran, shout out to you for being such an awesome host today and having me on. Yeah, I think that's it.
Sweet. Awesome. Well, yeah, thanks everybody for watching. Best of luck in all your games, and hopefully we've turned you into Gardy enjoyers as well.
Yeah.